To the people who record themselves crying and then post it to a social media, why? I've always been more of a dog person, but when my sister went to college I agreed to take her cat. At first I really didn't want to, I didn't have any other pets and didn't want the responsibility. That cat turned into my best friend, we did everything together. Had a harness and leash and would walk her around the neighborhood. She had to be put down at the beginning of the pandemic, the vets couldn't figure out what it was but her lung x-ray was nasty, they said it was most likely feline leukemia. I held her in my arms until her last breath. It absolutely broke me. I always thought of myself as a strong man, I buried lots of family members. This was different. She was a part of me. I couldn't even make the drive home, I had to pull over and just sob. I've never in my life sobbed like that, I was legit wailing. Been almost 2 years and I still have a hard time talking about it but it helps. Lost my 13-year-old kitty to cancer a couple weeks into the pandemic. I spent 3 hours crying in the rain while chipping through rock in the yard to bury him so he could still be near us. It hit me like a freight train. Spent weeks just randomly crying and being generally depressed. He was born to a stray I rescued from work in 2007. My wife and I had just moved in together and he was our first baby. We found good homes for the rest but kept him because he was really loving and all white. Miss him every day. They definitely become a part of you. He got me through so many hard times. Always made me get out of bed on my worst days and always seemed to know when I was down, and wouldn't leave me alone till I gave him some love, which always seemed to lift my spirits. Sad face, sorry you had to go through it too. Hey, I feel horrible, I need someone to talk to and be there for me. I was well into adulthood before I realized that most people are part of families where that kind of scripted language is considered good and important. Communicating like that in my family would get you mocked and laughed at until you felt humiliated to the core. Children of narcissistic parents do not get taught how to use words to describe feelings because narcissists don't want to hear it. It was kind of the same in school, tbh, authoritarian adults don't like children voicing their emotional needs. But not teaching children how to ask for what they need doesn't mean they stop having needs. The result is they grow up into adults who only know how to communicate their feelings in the most basic way possible, physically through crying, shouting, blushing, laughing, hugging, etc. If you grow up this way, crying is the only way you know how to communicate sadness. Since crying can't be translated to text, then you show the crying in a video. They might think, why is opening up and sharing about how I'm feeling something bad? Everybody is sad sometimes. I'm being real. Bringing my whole self to the internet. Edit. As the tone of this comment section shifts more towards empathy for online crying, I feel more comfortable sharing my first-hand account of a time I cried on the internet. The YT video from 2009 still exists and for a limited time I will make it public again. I posted loads of videos back then but they are all set to private now. Here's the story behind it. I had recently moved to Denmark from the US. And had recently come out as a man. We didn't come out as trans back then because nobody knew what that word meant. This was back before the transgender rights movement had any mainstream exposure. Due to one transgender vlogger who documented her transition online, YouTube became a kind of haven for trans people. Despite what headlines might have you believe, we are an extremely tiny minority and it is hard to find other trans people in real life. Back then it was close to impossible depending on where you lived. I went to the one gay bar in the Danish town where I lived and asked the guy who ran the place if he knew any transsexuals and he did not. Because of that one brave vlogger, other trans people started documenting their transitions on YouTube too and a little supportive community grew in what felt like a tiny, quiet corner of the internet. Part of documenting transition was also documenting the hate and rejection we went through. This was important for us to know that each of us were not alone in the pain of losing our friends and families. We weren't alone in experiencing the people who were closest to us telling us to go back in the closet and not transition. It also felt important to document transphobia to avoid gaslighting the way people feel a need to document police brutality. The cruelty was real. Our pain was real. I was terrified to come out to my family back in the States. Full-blown, suicide planned in detailed level terrified. Then I saw a YT video of a trans woman where she said she found the courage to come out because she realized that the fear of never getting to be herself was worse than the fear of coming out. I came out knowing that the ICC would still be there if I needed it. Coming out was every bit as hard as I thought it would be. My family was not accepting. Before calling my grandparents, I threw up. I was so nervous. The next day my grandma sent me an email telling me not to transition. The pain was so intense and I was so alone and so unable to handle it. Her rejection meant one fewer person I could turn to on a rapidly dwindling list. The video is of me crying with the text of my grandma's email overlaid. On a positive note, they all did eventually come around years later. Even my grandparents. But I value this video because it's documentation of something really hard that I went through, the vanishing of a support network. People who are annoyed with online criers think they should turn to their support network instead. This video is documentation of how someone's support network can disappear overnight. Thankfully, in my case, that was only temporary. But for several years my family left me to handle the difficulties of transitioning completely on my own. Side story, I became an activist and attended an OECD meeting in Warsaw on hate crimes on the internet. This was the kind of fancy meeting with tablecloths and name placards, where you wore an earpiece and a room of translators would help everyone communicate. I spoke out about how important YouTube was for my tiny minority group and how we didn't post videos there for the sake of being public. We did because we had no other ways of finding each other. We had to put up with the constant trolls and hate because we didn't have any other choice. An American woman approached me afterward. She asked to talk to me more about this. We had a long conversation and in it she introduced me to concepts like flagging and blocking and reporting, features YT did not have back then. She was from a very important agency and said they were in talks with YouTube and she wanted to know what I thought of this solution. She asked me if it would be helpful to people like me if we could flag or block hateful comments. I said, yes, please, we'd really appreciate a feature like that. I can't speak for all cultures, but I know American culture has a huge problem with the concept of needing attention, despite the fact that we're some of the biggest attention seekers out there. LMAO. People are quick to put someone on blast for seeking/wanting attention. But we all need it sometimes. If no one ever paid you any attention, that would be an incredibly lonely life. Most of us need to feel seen and heard. It's really weird to me that so many people see that need as negative, selfish, or childish. Edit. Since people keep trying to debate me about this. My original comment neither condoned nor condemned people posting videos of themselves crying, and in fact didn't even mention it. I realize that was the original topic for this post, but this comment wasn't about that specifically. It was a tangent about how people put others down for wanting attention, and how I don't think there's anything bad about needing or seeking attention. If no one ever paid you any attention, that would be an incredibly lonely life. Most of us need to feel seen and heard. It is a lonely life. I grew up feeling like I didn't get the attention I needed. I'd get attention, but it wasn't what I needed. I needed someone to validate me, to hear me, to listen, to actually fucking care about me. But instead, people would shed negative lights on me for wanting attention, which lead to me acting out in strange ways for it, which lead to a lot negative attention resulting in people calling me an attention whore. I'd be all of 14 to 15 years old and people would be calling me that name and telling me I need to learn how to stop doing things for attention. Sadly, a line adult me still hears, which didn't do anything but teach kid me that no one really cares about me or what I'm feeling, So I'd bury everything and hardcore closed myself off from people and the world out of fear I'd be told I'm doing something for attention and getting name called again. I'm now a grown-ass adult who very much still struggles to feel seen and heard in this world. It's really lonely having to be the one to give yourself the attention you need because you don't know how to properly receive it from other people due to the fact that you're so used to attention being a negative thing. The trend started as a counter to all the fakeness of social media. The idea being, people only post stuff that makes them look happy and awesome. So to promote realness and embrace mental health truth, it became popular to post your low points. I will say, however, that I've noticed that with teens on social media they've embraced mental illness awareness to such an extent that it's actually swung in an alarming direction. I'm noticing that many kids now think that having a mental illness is cool and they are using it as a replacement for having a personality. There's a lot of kids in this upcoming generation who think having emotional breakdowns online, bipolar disorder, clinical depression, etc. somehow makes them interesting. It's this fucked up thing where some of the most popular influencers on TikTok/Insta post frequently about their mental illness, so kids now admire that bravery and low-key want to also have a mental illness so they can be different. As an example, I was reading an article recently about how there's a massive uptick in teen girls who have Tourette syndrome and they have directly linked it to some popular TikTokers with Tourette's who have millions of followers. That's not to say they are faking it, but that the power of suggestion is so powerful that girls are now displaying some of the same outbursts and tics that made the TikTokers they follow so internet famous. It's pretty wild to me how much the internet enabled adults full on bullying and harassing children, especially the internet many years ago. Obviously bullying is still a problem and probably worse than ever, but it's so much harder for things to become pretty much permanent memes like that with the internet being totally saturated with kids doing their cringy kid stuff. The other one that's always blown my mind, always being since I was an adult. I was guilty of being hateful about this as a teen, is Rebecca Black and Friday. Every teenager these days does nothing but make cringy music and dance videos. Even if they didn't, imagine being an adult TV personality making fun of a 13 to 14-year-old ruthlessly. There was an interview from when she was young where someone asks how she felt seeing the reactions and she says something like, "Well, I was 13 so, I cried," with a fake forced laugh. Again, not saying it's better now, but it's certainly different. It's probably worse but just in totally different ways with grown-ass adults going after teens online and shit, but the kind of super centralized focus videos that now you just raise an eyebrow at and move on is just nuts to think about. Totally agree on cringe humor. It is, by its very nature, cruel. It's pretty wild to me how much the internet enabled adults full on bullying and harassing children, especially the internet many years ago. A few weeks ago I joined a casual game of CSGO. I normally don't have voice chat on because people are the worst, but I'd played some competitive and hadn't turned it off. Anyway, I get on and there's an 8-year-old kid playing. I know this because someone asked how old he was and he told them. He was bad, but he was having fun and liked chatting to people. Probably his parents shouldn't let him talk to random CSGO players, but that's neither here nor there. Now I get it. Kids can be annoying and an 8-year-old yapping into his mic isn't what everyone wanting to play a game wants to hear. But you know, mute him if you don't like it. Instead there were multiple adults, or at minimum people significantly older than him, talking shit and insulting him. Telling him how bad he was, that he should quit, trying to call votes to kick him. It was ridiculous. He's a damn child. The real thing was the clear mental distance these people were putting on it. Because after a few minutes I spoke up and said, "Hey guys, you do all realize you're shit talking and insulting a literal child playing a video game, right? Maybe grow up a little and act your age." Everyone stopped, despite me having zero power to do anything about their behavior. It was like they'd legitimately forgotten that the people on the other side of the game were, people. Since nobody seems to be actually answering the question, I guess I will. I'm mentally ill and wanted someone to ask me if I was okay / what was going on. People always say that if you're struggling you should talk to somebody, but it's very hard to actually start that conversation. Yes, I wanted attention. I wanted support. I wanted someone to reach out and show me that they cared. A lot of you seem to think that makes me a horrible person, but maybe try and look at things from a different perspective. Yes, I've done shit before to seek attention, but that doesn't make me not ill, nor a bad person. If somebody is so desperate for attention, then perhaps they actually need it. Disclaimer, I know that this isn't healthy behavior and I don't do it anymore, but as a younger teenager I did, so I thought I would offer the perspective that OP actually asked for, rather than just saying because they're attention-seeking idiots with no life. Most of the comments here are taking the negative view that people who do this are looking for attention or even need / crave attention. And that some of those people are trying to spin it into profit. While that may be true for many or even most people, I think something is being missed here: documentation. The proliferation of phones and recording devices has made it easier to document everything. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to do that, even if it's traumatic, grief, etc. Not only is there nothing inherently wrong or self-promoting about documenting, there are many positives to it, including helping those facing similar trials and taboo circumstances. One that comes to mind is miscarriages. It's something that typically hasn't been talked about openly. Parents often have to keep that in and face mental health and emotional issues alone. It can also be educational to document authentic emotional experiences. I'd be willing to bet there are other positive reasons for doing it. If I filmed and produced a documentary on grief, and filmed myself and others experiencing it, I don't think this sub would be full of the comments this thread has. Even if I profited from it. I know it's good for my head to make a practice out of considering positive and outlying issues instead of knee-jerk reacting to something and jumping to conclusions about people's character. I don't post anything on social media really, so this doesn't apply to me. In fact, I didn't know posting yourself crying was a thing until this post. However, the other day I was listening to music on YouTube made by someone in her room, and one song started with her crying while some text explained how lonely and depressed she was when writing the song. It stopped me in my tracks. People crying make me very uncomfortable. Maybe it's because I'd get the "I'll give you a reason to cry" followed by a smack to the face for crying when I was a kid. Maybe it's because men aren't supposed to cry. I'm sure there are a lot of reasons why crying makes me so uncomfortable. So back to the question. I've never seen someone cry on my social feeds, but I hope it wouldn't make me as angry as all the commenters here seem to get. I'd hope it'd make me stop in my tracks again and feel empathy for the person. Just take a moment to realize how hard life can be. Have you ever watched the Pixar movie Inside Out? Remember, the point of the sadness character was to alert people in the girl's life that she needed support or comforting. Maybe these crying videos are just a modern take on someone reaching out for support or comforting. Also, if it's okay to post videos of yourself laughing or smiling, shouldn't it be the same for crying? Crying isn't a bad thing, so why is everyone acting like it is? I imagine in a healthier society people could express a fuller range of emotions without any stigma. Weird as it might sound, it turns out the worst outcomes for a child result from inconsistent parenting. It's the lack of stability. So running hot / warm / affectionate but possibly overprotective all the time, or being generally colder and more distant all the time, actually have better outcomes than oscillating between hot and cold. In this case, it's a certain type of parent who might barely remember their child exists, unless the kid loudly bawls and acts out dramatically, then they give the kid a lot of warm, tender attention for like a few moments. The kid realizes they need to really make it loud to get attention. A colder parent might acknowledge a bawling child but nowhere as warmly or emotionally. This usually results in a child who is emotionally distant and avoidant, rather than the histrionic attention-seeking example being discussed here. In contrast, the avoidant child learns that even crying doesn't work, so they become shut off and tell themselves they don't need attention at all.